Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome. Hello, hello. I can see we have quite a few joining us who've come along in the last few minutes. So hopefully everybody has the Student Finance Truth and Myth image on screen. If not, please put a comment in the chat box and I can check as to what's happening there. Hopefully you can all hear me as well. That's excellent if you can. So thank you for joining us tonight. This session has come about through my conversations with students. My name's Peter Small. I'm a careers advisor and director at the company called the Yeti Limited. And in my meetings with students, it's become clear there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of worry about student finance and the costs and the repayment schedules and that sort of thing, to the point where I feel it puts a lot of students off attending. So, having worked with Liz from Staffordshire before, I was very aware of how good her presentation was and her level of knowledge. And I thought, this is something that there's a need for, let's put this out there. So hopefully, during the course of this presentation, we'll deal with your questions, your concerns around finance. I'm conscious we have both students and parents joining us. So again, hopefully we can deal with the questions and issues that you got from both sides. As you can see from what's on screen, we are more than happy to take questions. The more you engage, the more we get from you, the more useful and beneficial the session will be. You can put your questions into the chat box at the bottom of the screen there. You can also tweet those out to me on Twitter using the handle @YetiChorus. If, however, you're looking for something a bit more anonymous, there is an opportunity there to go to a website called slido.com. That's SLIDO.com. You'll be asked to enter a code, and that code for tonight's session is 65345. That will then let you post any questions. I'll be monitoring that as we go through. And then as we come towards the end of the session, we're going to try and leave a big chunk of time so we can work our way through those questions. If you're happy popping up on the video to ask that, then that's absolutely fine as well. There's a function where you can raise your hand or you can unmute yourselves, hopefully, and you can put that question forward if that's going to be beneficial for you. So, without any further delay, I am going to stop screen sharing. I'm going to mute and stop my video. Liz, I can see you. There you are. There
Hi, everyone.
Hello. I'm going to hand over to you, and hopefully the technology works. If not, everybody, bear with us.
Lovely. So while Pete's busy sorting that out, I'd just like to say good evening to everybody. It's great to see so many of you have been able to join us today, especially with everything that's going on in the world right now. Crazy times. So welcome along to this session, which will be all about student finance. And I'd just like to echo what Pete has just outlined, really. We are more than aware that student finance is really daunting at the very best of times, particularly if you're a first generation student that is considering going to university. And we appreciate that events this year might have stopped you from gaining the information that you need to help you make those really important decisions. And obviously events in the news probably haven't helped ease any of your worries that you might have as well. So we really hope this session will really help to demystify any myths and just give you those all important facts to help you on your way over the next few months. So then before we get started, I just want to make you aware as well that the figures that I'll be sharing with you this evening are based on this year's cohort, so those students that will have started in September just gone. So what you'll find is that every year around the springtime, Student Finance will make an announcement to let everybody know if there's been any changes to those figures. So you usually find there's some slight increases in line with the cost of living, so it's worth keeping your ear to the ground on all of that. And as Pete just said as well, if you do experience any tech issues, then please do feel free to shout, raise your hand, let us know. I'm not sure I'll know the answer, but we'll do our best to help you out with that. Okay, so without further ado, I'll start sharing my slides and we'll get going. Okay, so hopefully these slides have started to load for you all. If not, please do let us know in the chat box or raise your hand. You should see a title page saying Student Finance Explained with the Staffs Uni logo there. And I will obviously take your silence as yes, you're all good to go. So then, during the duration of this session, the topics we will aim to cover include exploring the idea of student debt. We'll look at the different types of support that's out there for yourself or your son or daughter if you're a parent joining this session today. We'll look at the eligibility criteria that you need to meet in order to be eligible for student finance, as well as explore the additional support that's out there, as well as the application process as well. Okay, so as Pete's outlined, do feel free to interact as much as you feel comfortable doing during this session, either through the chat box on Twitter or through Slido. I just wanted your thoughts in response to this question, so feel free to post away in whatever channel you prefer. So I wanted your thoughts as to how much debt on average you feel students tend to leave university with. You might have heard some horror stories in the news. Maybe you've heard something from your son, your daughter, or yourself if you go to sixth form or college. Maybe you've got some siblings or friends that have been through the process. So we just wondered what your thoughts are about this question. So do take some time to post your ideas if you're able to. So we can actually share that on average it is around £50,000 worth of debt, and by this point, normally when we're delivering in schools and colleges, a large, sharp intake of breath, as you can imagine, and it is obviously a very scary figure to see at first glance, but we wanted to take some time to explore this with you and give you all the information that you need to understand that it's not as scary as it might first appear. So it's really important to consider the repayment conditions. So Martin Lewis, who you may well have known from the TV show on ITV, or if you read his articles online, we very much, consider the whole idea of student finance is a no-win, no-fee education, because ultimately how much your son or daughter repays on that overall debt that they owe depends on how much they earn after they finish their studies at university. And we'll explore that a little bit further in a moment. So it's good to see it as a graduate contribution rather than a traditional debt payment. Okay, so it's very, very different to a commercial loan that you might take out from a bank or a building society, for example. And essentially, and you might already be aware of this already, but after 30 years, any outstanding balance that your son or daughter might be owing on their student loans is actually written off after 30 years. So no matter how much is outstanding, it will get written off. So it's really important to be aware of that. So the biggest thing we want you to take away from today's session is that essentially those who leave university and end up earning the most in terms of their salary over their working lifetime will end up contributing the most back to those loans that they've borrowed. If you're somebody that goes to university and you perhaps don't have as high a salary as somebody else, then that is very much reflected in how much you will repay on your student loans, and we can share with you some key figures during today's session. So this is the contribution system as it stands right now. So just a reminder that this is based on figures for those students that have entered university this September. So it is likely to change very slightly in the spring. So do keep your ear to the ground on that. So hopefully you can see a table in front of you now, just sharing with you the kind of monthly contributions that your son or daughter would be expected to make on their repayments once they finish university. So as you can see in the table in front of you, the threshold that the student has to be earning over is £26,575 a year. Okay, if they don't earn over that amount, they will not make any repayments. So just going back to the point that we saw on the earlier slide about the debt being written off after 30 years, let's just imagine the student goes throughout all their working life not earning over that threshold. They would end up never making any repayments whatsoever on the debt that they owe. And as you can see, it's a bit of a sliding scale. So let's just imagine the student earns £28,000 a year. Once they finish university, you can see they will end up repaying £10 a month, okay? At the higher end of the scale, if they end up working in a job where there's a £50,000 salary, that figure per month is closer to £175 per year. Okay, so hopefully already that's started to ease some of the worries that you might have had about making repayments on student finance. So we'll start to get into what's actually available to any students considering going to university. So there are ultimately two types of student loan available. Some of you might have heard about these already. If so, again, feel free to drop them in the chat box. Let me know your thoughts, what you know already about these. So the first one is the tuition fee loan, okay, and does exactly what it says on the tin. So it's there to cover the costs of tuition fees at university. And then we have what we call the maintenance loan, which is there to support students with their day-to-day living costs. So the really important point you need to take away from this slide is that you don't need the cash up front in order to go to university. Okay, that's really, really important. So the tuition fee loan is non-means tested. So in other words, they will not look at your household income in order to make a decision as to whether that student gets support with their tuition fees. Okay, so that's really, really positive. It is considered a virtual loan. So essentially that £9,250 that the student's borrowing to cover the tuition fees, they will not get to see that money. So you're probably breathing a huge sigh of relief at this stage. So the way it actually works in reality is your son or daughter will apply to student finance in the spring, ready for September study at university. And when they enrol to their university in September, the university sends notification to Student Finance England that your son or daughter has turned up and that they've enrolled, and then the funds get released directly to the university. Could you all imagine hopefully you can all still hear me.
Sorry,
yeah.
Liz, that was me. Hopefully we're back on for everybody. Sorry, guys.
That's absolutely fine, not a problem. So just to reiterate that last point there, so essentially the tuition fee loan is a virtual loan. So the £9,250 that your son or daughter would be loaning to cover the cost of tuition fees gets paid directly to the university. Obviously, you can imagine all the nightmares you would have if that kind of money went straight into your son or daughter's bank account. So you don't have to worry about that. It will completely bypass them. And then it's worth bearing in mind that there is a limit. So there is a cap of £9,250 for that tuition fee loan. Okay. Then moving on to the maintenance loan. So this is means tested. So this is where they will look at your household income in order to determine as to how much maintenance loan they're prepared to award your son or daughter. There is the option not to provide household income, but that will mean that the amount they get in maintenance loan will ultimately be capped. This money is paid directly to the student, so any students listening to this will probably be breathing a huge sigh of relief. So yep, this will arrive straight into your bank account after enrolment and once everything's been confirmed with the university and Student Finance England. Now, the amount that you are likely to receive is dependent on a number of circumstances, which we will talk you through in a moment. So as with every other university out there, you know, whichever university you're considering applying to, it's really, really important that you do your research and just investigate for your own peace of mind more than anything how much they are actually charging for their tuition fees. So there's some different terminology out there to be aware of. The majority of undergraduate programmes are currently around the £9,250 mark. You might have heard about foundation degrees, which is kind of like a bridging year that some students might opt to do if they've not studied a particular subject before at school or college, or perhaps are a little bit uncertain about studying that degree for the full 3 years. In which case, foundation degrees are around, and foundation years are around £9,250 a year as well, as are PGCEs, and 2-year fast track degrees, which the government are really trying to push at the moment. So they're a 3-year degree, just condensed down into 2 years, more intensive mode of study, as you can imagine. They've got a slightly higher price tag per year of £11,100. So it's just good to be aware if there are any variations. So do check that out, and you can find that information on all the university's websites, so I definitely urge you to do that if you haven't done so already. So what are tuition fees actually for? Feel free to put your ideas down on Slido, the chat box, or on Twitter. What do you think that £9,250 actually goes towards? So we can share with you that in terms of Staffs Uni, we put that money towards things like helping students access fieldwork trips. So if they've got any fieldwork opportunities within their course that they're expected to participate in, we will support with the cost of that so that they can access those opportunities. You might find that with some of the courses that we offer at Staffs Uni, we work in partnership with external bodies and external organisations, and we might run exams for students to take extra certificates, in which case we will support with the cost of the student taking that exam for their first attempt. And students on any creative art-based degrees, so the likes of photography, fashion, illustration, animation, and so on, those students in their final year are expected to showcase their work as part of an exhibition on campus, which, as you can imagine, can get quite expensive for students. So there is support available for those students as well. And similar to the last slide, you'll find that every university will differ. So you might find that some universities offer similar things to us within that package. Others might have their own little things that they include in their bucket list. So again, it's worth just kind of doing your homework and finding out what is actually on offer at all the universities. So what do you think the maintenance loans might get spent on? So I wondered if you've got any thoughts about this. I can almost hear you all laughing right now. I'm sure you can think of some good ideas as to what students might be spending that money on. Things like accommodation, all the sensible things, food, bills, course materials, travel costs. But it's worth bearing in mind that whatever your son or daughter gets awarded in terms of maintenance loan, it's unlikely to cover absolutely everything. So it is really worth spending that time before they go to university in September, just, you know, taking a really long, hard look at where the outgoings are, you know, things that are easily missed like mobile phone bills, stationery costs, and so on, and just making sure that you're putting those plans in place to cover all of those. Really, really important. It's probably worthwhile me mentioning as well that whatever maintenance loan your son or daughter gets awarded, it will be broken up into 3 instalments throughout the academic year. So they won't have that loan as one lump sum. So they will need to make each instalment last. So you'll tend to find that the first instalment arrives around September time after enrolment, the next instalment around January, and then the final instalment around April, May time. So really worth putting a budget together there and just making sure that you can make that maintenance loan last as long as possible. So as you may have heard me mention earlier on in this session, in order to access as much of the maintenance loan as possible, Student Finance England will require evidence of your household income. Okay, so it will be worth sitting down together when you put the application in, getting all the relevant paperwork together just to make your lives easier when it comes to filling this section out. Really important point I wanted to raise with you today as well is that when they request household income as evidence, they will request it from the previous financial year, which obviously in this current climate can present some drawbacks. You know, obviously lots of families and households have been really affected by the pandemic in terms of changes to jobs, redundancies, and so on. So there is a bit of a caveat out there for you to be aware of if you are somebody that's been severely affected by events that are going on at the moment, and that's in the form of a current year assessment. So if you feel that your household income has changed and dropped drastically since the previous financial year, then I would definitely urge you to contact Student Finance England directly to arrange for a current year assessment to take place instead. And potentially that could result in your son or daughter having access to more of the maintenance loan. And I'll share the rates that are available for that in a moment. So Student Finance will also take it into consideration if there are 2 or more children in your household that are at university at the same time. So that's worth factoring in as well. So I'm just going to share with you the income thresholds that are currently standing for the maintenance loan. So a table will appear in a moment and you can see the different thresholds on the left-hand side, but there's another piece of criteria that you need to be aware of as well. So how much your son or daughter will be in receipt of will also depend on where they plan to go to university. So for example, if they decide to stay at home and commute into university, there is one rate for those students. If they decide to move away to a university that's outside of London, there is a different rate for those students. And if your son or daughter is intending to live and study at a university within London, there's a separate rate for those students as well. So I'll just give you all a moment to digest the table that hopefully you can see on the screen in front of you. While you're taking this in, do feel free to post any questions that you might have, which we can pick up in the Q&A a little bit later on. So just a reminder, you can post your questions in the chat box on this call via Twitter or via Slido. Okay, so I'll just give you a few moments to take that information in. So it's worth me reiterating at this point as well that hopefully you can see even those households that are at the top end of the scale that might be earning above 60,000, there is still a basic rate of maintenance loan available for those students. So really important to bear that in mind as well. Okay. So then just to kind of summarise where we're up to so far. So we've obviously taken you through the tuition fee loan, the maintenance loan. And it's worth me highlighting here as well, and you may have read about this in the news, that interest does get charged to the loans that are being borrowed by the student. So interest tends to get charged from the moment the student receives the first payment from Student Finance until they finish paying off their student loans. Okay, so really important that I highlight that to you all today. And just a reminder that your son or daughter will not have to make any contributions to what they owe until they are earning over £26,575 a year. Okay, and I just wanted to reiterate as well that obviously this is based on figures for those students that have started this September. Usually we find around the springtime the government makes another announcement confirming what the figures will be for the following year. So you tend to find that income threshold that you can see on the slide in front of you right now tends to increase slightly every year in line with the cost of living. So worth keeping your ear to the ground on that, just so that you make sure that you're up to date with all the latest information. And I'll share some really important websites with you a little bit later on. So just a reminder, if you have thought of any questions so far, just to post those in the chat box on Twitter or on Slido. Okay. So eligibility. So in order to be in receipt of this support, it must be the student's first degree, and there are some exceptions to that. It must be an approved course at a registered university. You must be considered a UK resident or have settled status for at least 3 years prior to the first day of the academic course. And so we then go on to the topic of EU and international students. And normally I would talk a little bit around the criteria that's in place for those students. And as I'm sure you're aware, we have obviously got a lot of changes that are due to come into force from January, with Brexit coming into play. I'm sorry to throw that B word at you all this evening, as if we haven't got enough on our plates at the moment. But it's just really important that I make you aware that obviously the guidance and criteria that's in place for EU and international students is currently being decided and is yet to be announced. So the arrangements for that aren't clear at the moment. So I wouldn't like to guess as to what that will be, but we would expect an announcement, a formal announcement from the government in the new year. So definitely watch this space on that one. Okay. So additional support. So in addition to the tuition fee loan and the maintenance loan that I shared with you, there is further support available. So should your son or daughter decide to opt for part-time study at university, there is a part-time maintenance loan available for those students. There are criteria in place that the student would need to meet to be eligible for that, such as studying at least 25% intensity for the year. They have to physically be in attendance at university. It's worth scoping out with Student Finance if there's been any changes with that in light of the situation as well. And just bear in mind that there are some exclusions that do apply. So through Student Finance England, I'm just going to walk you through some of the extra support that is out there. And the first one is the Disabled Students Allowance. You might hear this being referred to as the DSA. So this is essentially an allowance for students who might have additional needs, which could be things from mental health conditions, any physical or mobility impairments. It could be learning difficulties such as dyslexia, for example. And it's worth stressing that this isn't money in the bank account. So this won't go straight into the student's bank account, but it's a kind of a support fund that is there for the student to access, and it's money that will be spent directly on the resources that are needed to help the student with the need that they've got. So just to throw an example out there, and it is a very, very rough example, if your son or daughter is dyslexic and they've got the assessment confirming all of that, that would be submitted to Student Finance England, and a recommendation would come out of that as to what they would benefit from and how much of this allowance they would be entitled to in order to access that support. And it could result in things such as having access to a new laptop with specialist software, having access to a voice recorder to take into lectures so that they can record the lecture and listen back to it, you know, should they need to. So that is just one example out there. Another one might be if your son or daughter has a mental health condition and they require support such as counselling, for example, the money would go towards funding having access to counselling support at the university. We then move on to the childcare grant. This can support students who might have any childcare responsibilities, and it can cover up to 85% of the childcare costs, providing that the childcare provider is Ofsted registered. This is very much based on household income and the number of children that you might have. There's then the Parents' Learning Allowance. So again, this is means tested. So if you are a parent considering university study, there is a set amount allowance available for you as well. That too is means tested, but it's worth checking out if that applies to you. There's also the adult dependence grant. So if you intend to be a full-time student at university but have to support another adult in the household financially, there is a grant available for that too. Worth highlighting as well that there might be some of you who could be care leavers or estranged from your family. If that is the case, at most universities, if not all, there will be specialist packages available for those students. So I can only share with you obviously the package available at Staffs Uni. So again, do your homework, research this with all the universities that you're looking into to get an idea of what's out there. So at Staffs Uni, it consists of having access to all year round accommodation if you're a care leaver, having a dedicated bursary up to the value of £750. Specialist application support both before you submit your application and before you join the university in September as well. Having access to dedicated contacts, so we have a fantastic student guidance team at Staffs Uni that are there to help students who might be a care leaver or estranged from their family. And I know from, I think it's last year or the year before, we have a wonderful team of staff who go out of their way to support these students who might find things like the Christmas holidays, Easter holidays and summer holidays really difficult. So they go out of their way to put on events and create a little bit of a community on campus that's really, really inclusive and really, really welcoming. So that support really, really does go a long, long way. So if you need any support, any further info on that, please do feel free to take a note of the details that you can see in front of you, and I can share those a little bit later on as well. So for some students who might be considering the likes of nursing, midwifery, all those kind of related healthcare courses, there is extra funding available for those students. Again, it's always worth doing your homework with this and just double checking, really making sure that your course is one that is eligible for the support I'm about to outline to you all. So very recently, so at the beginning of this year, the government announced that they would be introducing a healthcare bursary for students studying on eligible courses. So paramedic students, nursing, midwifery, and there's a whole host of other courses that come under this as well. And it is a minimum £5,000 a year bursary that does not have to be paid back. So really, really exciting developments for healthcare students there. And in addition to that, there is additional £1,000 grants on top of that available, depending if you meet the criteria that's in place for those. So for example, if you need support with childcare and you're on an eligible healthcare course, you can get an additional £1,000 on top of that £5,000. If you are studying a particular specialism where there is a real shortage of recruitment to those areas, and one example off the top of my head would be mental health nursing, that would entitle you to an additional £1,000 on top of that £5,000. And finally, if you are studying or go on to work in a region where there is a shortage of recruitment to that particular specialism, there will be an additional £1,000 on top of that £5,000 as well. The details of that last piece of criteria is still being ironed out. I had a check this afternoon and there's still no further arrangements that have been made for that yet. So we're just waiting to hear from the government on that. In addition, there's also the Learning Support Fund. So this was in place before the healthcare bursary arrived onto the scene earlier this year. So this is made up of 3 components. Again, there's a slightly different list of eligible courses, healthcare courses for this pot. So do be aware of that. And the 3 strands that make up this are the Parent Support Fund. So if you have children that you need to look after while studying full time, there is financial support with that. There's the Travel and Dual Accommodation Allowance. So if you are on placement and you have to go and work at a hospital that exceeds your commute from your base to the university, you can claim for the difference in mileage or the travel costs, such as the train tickets or public transport tickets there. If your hospital placement is really out in the sticks and you end up having to stay over in accommodation in order to attend that placement, again, you will be reimbursed for that. And there's also the Exceptional Hardship Fund, which forms the third strand of this fund. So if you find yourself struggling financially at any point, there is that fund to tap into as well. And for those students on healthcare courses, you will find they tend to be in university a lot longer than most mainstream courses. So if their academic year exceeds the standard 30 weeks academic year, then they will be eligible for a long course loan, which is basically an extension of the maintenance loan. So more money in the bank to help them with their day-to-day living costs. And all that information that I've just taken you through is available via the NHS BSA website, so separate to the Student Finance England website. Really important to remember that. So just a reminder, NHS BSA. In addition to all of that, so it's worth, again, checking this out with each of the universities that you're interested in applying to. Find out what bursaries and scholarships they might have available for you. So these are essentially pots of money that do not have to be paid back. Again, they differ at all universities. In some cases, you might find that they might award you £500 if you achieve certain grades in certain subjects at your school or college. They might say they'll give you a certain amount of money if your household income is below a certain threshold. So there's all sorts of different incentives out there. So definitely scope this out with your universities and find out what's on offer. There will be no worse a feeling than getting to your second or third year and only finding out about them at that point when everybody else has been getting them during the first year. So please do your homework with that. And so just to start wrapping up on the application process. So applications for student finance open in the spring, so usually around February, March time. So I would urge you to sign up to the student finance website or social media channels, and I can share those with you in a moment, just so that you are staying on top of everything and you get those notifications. I am aware that UCAS normally send out notification as well once you've submitted your UCAS application, providing that you've opted in to receive communications from them. So you'll usually find that you can get this done in one sitting. So for those of you that have experienced filling out the UCAS form, it can be quite long-winded at times, having to fill out all the different sections. This student finance application can be done in around 15 to 20 minutes, providing that you've got all the information that you need. If you opt to nominate a parent or guardian to support your application in terms of household income, they will be notified in around 24 to 48 hours of you initially registering in order for them to supply their household income and support your application. Okay, so really important that you get that evidence together, and Student Finance will inform you what evidence they need to receive from you to support your application. And from then on in, you can keep maintaining your account from there. And you will receive an entitlement letter once they've made their assessment, which normally takes around 6 to 8 weeks. They will write to you and give you a breakdown of what you're likely to receive and when you're likely to receive it as well. Okay. I must say, my experiences this year, I found that Student Finance were a lot swifter in dealing with the assessments, and we're getting it done in a much shorter time frame. So whether that will continue next year, I'd like to think that it will, but on average we do tend to say 6 to 8 weeks as a buffer, just in case. So just some things to summarise and to keep in mind. So hopefully as we head towards the end of this session, this has helped you to understand that it's not like a commercial debt that you would get from a bank or building society. It is manageable, and that's helped by the fact that you make repayments according to your salary, not on how much you owe. So everything will always be manageable. And a reminder that if you've got any outstanding balance after 30 years, it will get written off. Okay. So that is very much it from me. So appreciate I've babbled on an awful long while to you all. So I hope you're still with us. So we'll obviously start to open the floor to any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Liz. That was absolutely brilliant. I think you've covered everything there. Looking at some of the questions we have had through, we have had a few. There's a couple of points I wanted to pick up on as well, just to kind of reiterate some of what Liz has mentioned, actually. You talked about the sandwich placement on that list of fees. You mentioned sandwich placement.
Yeah.
I remember reading somewhere, and tell me if this is wrong, that's normally charged at around 20% of the normal tuition fee rate.
Okay, yeah, I'm not too clear on percentages, but I know from past experience, and this might change in the spring, but it can be anything up to £1,850 per year that the university can charge for that placement year. So you might find that with some institutions, they'll make it completely free of charge. Others might put a charge of around £1,000. Others might go right up to the cap of 1,850. So again, really do your homework with that and find out. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I wanted to ask that because I'm a massive fan of the sandwiches.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, totally agree.
It's worth pointing out as well, when you talked about how much a graduate has to earn before they start paying that back. I think for me, I've just had a quick look actually, and the average graduate salary is around 23 grand a year. Obviously, that depends on the subject you've done at uni. There is a lot of variation, but I think it's probably worth pointing that out for students and parents.
Yeah, and I probably should have said as well, it's very much, it gets taken like a deduction. So like your son or daughter doesn't even really need to budget for that money going out. So it gets taken before their wages hit their bank account each month. So they won't even notice it. And hopefully from the figures that you saw on the screen, hopefully you'll agree, is relatively manageable, I think.
I'm certainly still paying mine, I can tell you that. I'll be paying you for a long time yet, I think.
Sore subject.
Yeah, let's not go there. Another one from me, and then we'll get to everybody's questions, because again, there's some more good ones coming through.
Brilliant.
Something that students and parents apply for each year.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, I should have mentioned that as well. So yeah, so you'll initially sit down in February, March this time whenever applications open. So like I say, there will be an announcement for that. So you'll sit down to do that initial application, and then the following spring, during your first year at uni, you will then get a notification from Student Finance asking you to sit back down and just basically update if there's been any changes. I've been led to believe that in the past few years they've done a lot of work to try and make that process a lot smoother and slicker for continuing students, because I think it used to be really, really long-winded in the past. But yeah, just a case of sitting down, checking over everything, reviewing everything and sending them any updates, i.e. updated household income where relevant.
Great, thank you. While I get the next one together, could you put that slide back up with the open dates on, please?
Yes, absolutely. Where are we?
Day dates.
Let me know if you can all see that. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Lovely.
So there, as you might expect, there's lots of questions coming in about the income thresholds for income assessments for parental assessments.
Yeah.
One of those is very much about, is that a joint parental income, particularly if, say, parents are separated and the child lives 50-50 between them? Is it still a joint? How does that work in that case?
Yeah, really good question. So it is based on the parent that the student spends the most time with. You pick up on a really important point there, Pete, 50-50. I'm not entirely sure how that would work if it is an even split. So that is one to scope out with Student Finance. But the bottom line I do know is it's whoever they spend the majority of the time with. If you are a parent, but you're living with your partner, they will look at your partner's income and combine those two to make their assessment.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We've had a question about if a student has pre-settled status.
Yes.
Are they still eligible for Student Finance? That's quite a technical one. Sorry, Liz.
Yeah, that's really, really tricky to answer, I'm afraid. So I would really urge you to contact Student Finance England directly about that. Even before the changes, were announced that were going to come into force, I'd still be unsure about the answer to that. So I would recommend you contacting Student Finance England directly. And I must say, I don't know about you, Pete, but every time I've rang Student Finance directly just to ask a question for my own, info, I found them really responsive on the phone, really, really helpful. So if you like, I can post those contact details in the chat for you all if you'd find that useful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just wouldn't want to, guess and give you the wrong answer.
That's fine. It is worth me mentioning that I am working with Student Finance to put something like this on that would very much be a sort of Q&A.
Brilliant.
Session.
Yeah.
So keep an eye out for that. There will be more coming about that. We've also had a question about accommodation costs. So if the student loan fee doesn't cover, that section of the accommodation, where does that leave a student? Is there anything they can do to bump up that student entitlement, the student loan amount? How does that work if student accommodation is much more expensive than they're offered?
Yeah, it is really difficult, and I think it will involve a lot of sit downs at home and just having a real honest chat and looking at if there are any avenues of support within the family, and I know everybody's not that fortunate, and that's absolutely fine, in which case it is worth exploring part-time work opportunities. If you already have a part-time job and it's at a chain store, more often than not you can have a conversation with them, and I've heard instances where students can get transfers to the branches that are based within the university city or town that they're moving to. If you haven't got a part-time job, so definitely would consider exploring that. I can only speak on behalf of staff, so I'm not sure if it's the case at other unis, but I know that staff's uni, for things like the cafes and restaurants we have on campus, the students' union shops that we have, we kind of ring fence those jobs so that they're available for current students to apply to and work, because we recognise how difficult it can be to get a part-time job. But it's worth, if you are moving away, starting that job search early, so hopefully get something arranged in time for ready for when you start. You might have also heard about Freshers Week or Freshers Fortnight at universities. So obviously they've had to take place virtually this year. In some cases we've been able to do it socially distanced, but that is also a good opportunity to explore a bit more about the uni and find out what part-time jobs are available. So we have a uni temp service that's available to do just that. Most unis also have a student ambassador scheme, and that is where they will recruit current students to represent them at events like careers fairs, UCAS exhibitions, to deliver talks in schools and colleges. And obviously they've been impacted by the events this year, so have resorted to doing support online and hope to get back out to physical events when circumstances allow. But the student ambassador scheme at Staffs is really, really flexible, good rates of pay as well, so will really fit around your studies. In addition to that, it's obviously worth scoping out the bursaries and scholarships that are available at your universities that you're interested in, and seeing what opportunities you might be eligible for. And just bearing in mind as well that obviously, financially this has been a really difficult year for everybody, but something that universities have always had in place is an emergency student fund. So if your son or daughter should ever find themselves, which I hope they wouldn't, but if they do find themselves struggling financially, there is a support fund for them to tap into. And you'll find that universities will have a students' union as well, which is kind of a whole other support mechanism in its own right, which might be able to give you access to extra funds as well.
Great, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Lovely.
I should add, just as a finishing note, I'm going to do another one of these sessions again about scholarships, bursaries, how to find them, where are they, all of that sort of information. There's some really good apps out there as well that can help students kind of profile themselves and find those sources of funding. So again, everybody keep an ear out and a lookout for that. Apart from that, I think that's pretty much it. We don't appear to have had any more. Just do a quick refresh and check. No, I think we're all right. Just for everybody's peace of mind, really, we are, of course, recording the session. I'll get that emailed out to everybody, or in a location where you can all access it. If you do have any questions or queries, both mine and Lizzie's details will be on that copy on that recording. So again, come back to us if there is any issues. Liz, thank you very much.
Thank
really,
you.
really appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a good evening. We'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.